Well, something that you and I have discussed in the past. We went from a very dangerous world to during the Cold War, where we faced the threat of nuclear incineration, to a very dangerous world where we face these kinds of terrorist threats, including proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And I think the reality is that we'll have to assess our intelligence capabilities. I don't think there's any doubt that we have superb technical intelligence capability. We abandoned to a large degree the human intelligence capabilities back in the late 1970s, and we may have to. I've always said that we needed to do more in that direction. I think that it is remarkable, some of the things already that we know, including the fact that these hijackers must have known how to fly an airplane. That's a pretty your average terrorist doesn't have that capability. The sophistication of this operation is mind-boggling, and obviously we're going to want to know why our intelligence capabilities were not what we wanted them to be.
Senator, true or untrue that there have been occasions over the last, let us say, decade when the evidence pointed clearly to some sort of state-sponsored terrorism? I'm not suggesting that this was state-sponsored terrorism. I'm saying
Yes.
Clearly we don't know what this is.
Yep.
But is it true or untrue that in the past, over the last decade, there have been those occasions when the evidence pointed to certain states, and that for
Yes.
one reason or another, neither the executive nor legislative branch of our U.S. government wanted to attend to that, the decision was made to look the other way?
I don't know if the intention, if the action was to just look the other way, but I think there were indications. Whether there was conclusive proof or not was a judgment that was made by our leaders, both in the executive and legislative branch. I have felt that there's been involvement, but I'll be honest with you, Dan, I never thought that an operation of this sophistication and size would take place. I just never did. But I don't think there's any doubt that there are countries, Iraq, Iran, Libya, North Korea, and others.
Muchas personas pensaron pues sería un accidente aéreo, un avión que chocó contra la torre, una de las dos torres gemelas, el centro financiero mundial, en la ciudad que es considerada el centro más importante del mundo. Y minutos después, pues yo creo que llegó la muy triste consecuencia de lo que resultó ser no un accidente, sino lo que resultó ser un ataque terrorista de grandes magnitudes. Nosotros los vemos en la pantalla, esas imágenes están dando la vuelta al mundo, y para nosotros que las vemos y que nos quedamos atónitos, que no podemos creer lo que estamos viendo, no es nada en comparación a aquellos que lo vivieron en carne propia. Hemos escuchado algunas declaraciones, como por ejemplo las declaraciones de nuestra corresponsal Blanca.
And freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense.
Now, Tom, we are told that the president took off from Barksdale Air Force Base for an unknown location. There are any number of places.
Sin caras, para citarlo, van a ser cazados y castigados. Está en comunicación con el secretario de Defensa, con el vicepresidente Cheney. No sabemos en este momento dónde se encuentra el presidente de Estados Unidos. Sabemos que
offering as much protection and as much security as we're capable of for the citizens of the city. And at this point, I believe that the people in New York City can demonstrate our resolve and our...
Assisted in helping some of the injured leave the building before he then returned to his office and then went straight to the National Military Command Center, again on the opposite side of the Pentagon, to monitor events where he now remains. Tom, this airplane that ran into the Pentagon, it happened within the hour from the 2 planes that ran into the World Trade Center, but it took a full 4 hours before firefighters and rescue workers could actually contain the flames and fire inside, so it was safe enough for them to enter the building. And that was about an hour ago when we were told that rescue workers did enter parts of the building where you can see where the plane sliced through the Pentagon. Now, it was actually fortuitous that the second floors, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floors were still intact immediately after the blast. But
I was down there. I was close to the scene, at the scene, literally, when the towers came down. Byron Pitts and I were actually standing at the corner of Murray and West, where you heard Scott Pelley reporting from, and we were there when the towers went down. We literally ran from the roll of thick debris and smoke to the point when we ran into PS 89 to get as far quickly escaped from this sort of toxic cloud. Literally, when we got inside the school went black. It was like night, because when the cloud came over us and the debris started to hit, when you literally went back outside again, where we were standing was only crushed cars, debris, and cement. Dan.
Mika Brzezinski, live reporting from Lower Manhattan, although the picture you're seeing at this particular moment is videotape of the collapse of the World Trade Centers. Yes, both of the 110 stories World Trade Centers have collapsed. All U.S. security markets have closed. A conference call is scheduled tonight to decide whether to reopen tomorrow. Bellevue Hospital medical director, quote, "This is a catastrophe of unparalleled proportions," unquote. And the reason it is a result of what you're seeing on videotape. First one of the World Trade Center towers collapsed. Yes, collapsed. It looks like one of those scenes of an old building being, purposely dynamited and blown up. In this case, hijacked airliners, 2. Both of them American Airlines planes, apparently, were crashed, first one, then another, into the World Trade Center. And then first one tower and then the other collapsed, completely collapsed, and buildings around them collapsed. People were seen jumping, being forced out of the building on high floors. People on the street gasped as each person was seen coming out of a window. Abraham Lincoln, 1864. "Let not him who is houseless pull down the house of another, but let him work diligently and build one for himself."
Get rid of the clothes and get to an area where you can breathe in fresh air.
How many people were in the World Trade Center at the time of this attack?
I mean, it was business had already started. It was right before 9 o'clock. I don't know.
Tens of thousands?
Yes. Approximately. Someone just gave me a number of approximately 10,000, but that's a guess.
How long will the city remain on a heightened state of alert?
Until we're told not to. I mean, until the FBI and the police department and the federal government tells us that we shouldn't. Right now, the city is should be on a state of alert. Now, that instead of frightening people, that should make people feel more confident that everything is being done to keep things secure. And again, any other problems in the city right now.
How is the
Mr.
Port
Mayor, can you tell us about the other
buildings,
public
Mr. Mayor?
buildings, City Hall, One Police Plaza? When will Chief say for you to return?
I don't know yet. Hopefully soon, but I don't know the answer to that.
And we heard reports that One Police Plaza was evacuated. Was that true?
No, the command center is open.
And it was never.
We have people in the command center right now.
Mr. Mayor, there have also been reports of large loss of life among the police and firemen who were sent there to rescue people. How accurate are those reports?
There is no question that we lost police officers and firefighters, and some that I know personally, and all of us here know personally, that we're very worried about. And we're not going to know the answer to that until much later. And
I understand your emotional state. I'd like
Sure.
everybody's the same. I think we're all the same. Sure. Did you never consider that this was a possibility?
Well, we consider, and as we plan for New York City, we plan for massive events. In point of fact, one of the things that we did when I was still heading up OEM was we put in place memorandums of understanding with New Jersey, with Connecticut, Nassau, Suffolk County, to ensure that there was enough medical care available, that we had ambulances, police, firefighters, because we had to plan for horrific types of events. And as I told you when you were down, we planned for various types of incidents, chemical and biological types of attacks, for explosive types of attacks. The alternate was to go to police headquarters or to another location in the event that the command center was inactivated for some reason or rendered useless.
Do you know what has happened to it today? Do you know precisely what's happened?
I talked to some folks down there, and my understanding is that a lot of the debris has fallen and has blocked the access to the building. I've heard some reports that they're concerned about the structural stability of the building, but I have not been able to confirm that. But as part of our plan, there were backups. You always have backups in your planning, and that's what the city is doing today.
Now, you've had to walk to get here today, and that's perfectly...
Hit a precise target like the World Trade Center there and hit it right on the mark, that in this case, you'd have to have the hijacker at the actual controls of the plane. Because it's hard for me to imagine how you would force a pilot, even gun at his head or anything else, at the last moment. A single jerk of the plane's equipment could manage to miss the tower of the World Trade Center, perhaps go into the river, or imagine the Pentagon. You could go into a parking lot or an area right around there if you could jerk the yoke of the plane at the last moment. So I'm guessing that it's much more likely that the hijackers somehow disabled the crew and took over the control of these planes. But we may know eventually, because presumably the cockpit voice recorder has survived on each of these 4 airplanes, and the cockpit voice recorder would give you the actual conversation in the cockpit. Sometimes you can't precisely reconstruct what went on from what's being said back and forth, but the cockpit voice recorders of those 4 planes should give you at least everything that was said in the cockpits.
All right, thank you very much, NBC's Robert Hager. We're looking now.
There's one little bit of information just handed to me. We were talking about how many planes are still in the air. We said all the domestic planes had landed, and we now hear that there are 10 to 12 international flights, all of them bound into the West Coast, so presumably they were on the long Pacific run, or else the even longer Europe to the West Coast run. The 10 to 12 international flights still in the air. That's the last of it. All the domestic flights, as we'd said before, have landed.
All right, thanks, NBC's Robert Hager. We're going to go right now to, here's an update. The NBC affiliate in Omaha, Nebraska says that Air Force One has landed at Offutt Air Force Base, which is the headquarters of the Strategic Air Command. It's just south and east of Omaha. That is a place that the president very likely would go. It could not be more secure. They have a long landing pattern there and clear area all around them. And, of course, they've got one of the most secure bunkers anywhere in the world. It was the critical part of our Cold War strategy. The Strategic Air Command bunker, as I recall, having been down there, it's about 6 stories beneath the ground, and it is heavily reinforced, and it has all the communications that you can possibly imagine. That, it does appear, is where the president is going to be for the time being, at least, until they sort out whether this wave of attacks is over. The Strategic Air Command is been removed from our consciousness a lot because of the end of the Cold War, but now we know what the consequences are of having one war over and another begin. This is an act of terrorism that has occurred here today. We're going to go to Pat Dawson now as we look at these scenes of what it's like in lower Manhattan. The phrase nuclear winter has been used again and again, and it's not inappropriate. Pat?
No, it's not, Tom. Certainly, I can tell you that when we were standing just about 2 or 3 blocks south of here at that bridge that you can see down there, probably at that point about 6, 7, 8 blocks north of the World Trade Center this morning when that tower went down and the smoke literally billowed and the dust up the avenue. It was precisely like the movies that we have seen. Much of this is like movies. It is very, very hard as a reporter. You know that the first thing you do is reach for something to make a comparison to. And frankly, through much of this, it's almost impossible for me to find things that are a satisfactory comparison. Let us try to find out now as much as we can. This is Inspector Gene Ciccarelli from the Port Authority Police. Inspector, if you can give us some sense at this point of how close you are able to get your rescue units in there.
We've been attempting to get our rescue units into the area. Unfortunately, there are areas that are under possibilities of collapsing. We're still searching a good portion of the perimeter, and as far as going in any further than that, we have to get a clearance to make sure that there is no potential danger for any further collapse that can endanger the rescue operation.
Now, just to explain to the people who may not know this, and certainly people outside New York who don't, there are two towers, or were, to be more accurate, two towers of the World Trade Center complex, yet there are still other fairly large office buildings as part of the complex, correct?
There are other what they call plaza buildings surrounding the two twin towers.
Right, and those are how big?
Some of them range from 20 stories, approximately 20 stories.
By the standards of much of America, that would be a skyscraper, quite frankly.
Well, I wouldn't put them on the
But
level.
still, they're rather large buildings. They're still standing there. Is that part of the threat that you perceive at this point?
Yes, there are those other plaza buildings that we are concerned about and do have the potential of collapsing. So, in answer to your question, it isn't wise to enter into that area at this point.
How would you describe your efforts to organize the rescue effort now, given that we saw a sequence of events this morning, a sequence of crashes, then explosions, and then the collapses? How close are you now, perhaps, to being able to organize an actual rescue effort to go in there and start going through the debris?
We still have, like I said, a concern about going in and initiating a rescue if, in fact, there are other individuals there. We also have a very good operation in place at this time to pool all of our resources together in one staging area, that we have a phenomenal amount of equipment and supplies that would assure us of any efforts that we make to continue with the rescue approach. But at this point, we do have a good group assembled for that purpose.
But at this point, presumably there may be a great number of people in there in need of rescue. Obviously, the problem for you is that if you go in to try to get them out, you put your rescuers in danger.
That's correct.
And no idea of when you might be in a position to actually say, we think it's safe to go in after them now.
No, until we get a firm clearance on that, we won't enter into an area that could be hazardous to people that are attempting to make the rescue.
Inspector, thank you very much for speaking to us. We appreciate it. Tom, the latest from the Port Authority Police here in New York City. As we've explained, they have jurisdiction over the World Trade Center complex. They, of course, are working in cooperation with a number of other police and rescue and fire agencies here, both local and federal, and essentially describing the quandary that they find themselves in, which is rather rare, certainly unique, in the sense that we have seen the catastrophe repeatedly. We have seen through the morning 3 or 4 events which would qualify by anyone's description as catastrophes. It has now been probably a good 4 hours since the last one, but yet they still can't go in and begin a serious, comprehensive rescue effort because they're worried about what might still be there, what danger might still lurk for the rescuers that have gone in. Tom?
Thank you very much, NBC's Pat Dawson. This terrorist war that has been declared on America today in New York City and Washington, D.C., and psychologically across the country has had such an enormous effect already. It has all but immobilized the largest nation in the world politically. There's been a severe realignment of where people can go and do their jobs in the nation's capital. Dennis Hastert, the House Speaker, was whisked out of his office. The President of the United States, we believe right now, is at the Strategic Air Command headquarters outside of Omaha. We don't know where Vice President Cheney is, except we're told that he's in a secure location. Don Rumsfeld is back at his desk in a more secure location. Secretary of State Colin Powell is on his way back from Peru. Then you have the economic consequences. The largest financial market in the world was shut down today. People were in peril in that immediate vicinity. Businesses across America are doing no business, my guess is. Certainly in the largest cities, so many of them have been shut down. All flights have been grounded at this point, and all baseball games have been suspended. The Seattle Space Needle was shut down. Walt Disney World was evacuated. In California, Knott's Berry Farm was evacuated, and a lot of other theme parks. All national monuments have been evacuated today as well. This country is on hold in shock and horror, and probably the beginning of a great deal of anger and frustration as well. We're told that all planes now that were in the air have landed safely. The domestic flights, there are still some international flights that are yet to come here. We'll have to deal with our shock and grief in the days to come, and there will be a realignment of this country in so many ways, the forms of which we cannot say now, because we're going to have to work this out together, individually, and certainly from our political and our economic institutions. But certainly there will be a change in security and a loss of innocence, especially for young people who have never been through anything quite like this. The most devastating attack since Pearl Harbor, some people saying worse than Pearl Harbor at this time. Let's go to Virginia Chow of NBC News, who was down in the area. Virginia?
Well, Tom, you've already heard the unbelievable stories of people who survived, who are much closer to ground zero at the World Trade Center area. I was about 20 blocks north of that, and I witnessed the second tower collapsing. And what I observed, and what was amazing to me, were the reactions of the people as they watched this unfold around them. You have to remember that these are people who were streaming away from that area, who just minutes before were near the building or perhaps even in the building. And as I headed on foot going toward the World Trade Center, this was this morning when there was one tower still remaining. The first one had already collapsed. I was about 20 blocks north of there. There were thousands of people literally streaming toward me on foot, trying to escape that area like refugees from a war zone. I was one of the lone people, other than emergency personnel, heading toward the area when we heard a rumble. People stopped, turned to look, and we watched in horror as the second tower came crashing down on itself. People screaming out, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh no." And immediately, very emotional, people crying in tears, realizing that there were hundreds, maybe thousands of people in and around that building who were going to be either badly hurt or killed. And I think that the emotional impact of this for people, even if they don't know anyone personally down there, has been devastating. Tom?
Thank you very much, Virginia Chow, who is one of the many NBC reporters who have gone beyond the call of duty today in the lower part of Manhattan. There is the scene. It was not a cruise missile. It was not a nuclear attack. It was a hijacked airliner used as a weapon directed at the World Trade Center. The Twin Towers both came down. We know that more than 100 people on the airliners were killed, and an untold number of people were killed or seriously wounded in and around that area. And as you look at these scenes from several hours after the planes hit the building and after the World Trade Center came down, you have some sense of the magnitude of the devastation. Jules Rennell is the manager of the World Trade Club at the World Trade Center. He, fortunately for him, was not there today. Mr. Rennell, how many people would be in the building, in your judgment, at 8:45 in the morning?
Probably somewhere around 20,000 people, Tom. A lot of the financial institutions like Cantor Fitzgerald and Morgan Stanley Dean Witter open early. So all those people would be in the building early, with the rest of the population coming in between 8:30 and 9:30.
Where were you when you heard about all this?
My son called me, and I came down and I turned on the television and saw the flames coming out of the building. And at that stage, recognized, the magnitude of what was happening. But in my wildest imagination, could never believe that those buildings could be destroyed. I mean, the Trade Center itself is like a small city. 35,000 people work there every day. Countless thousands of people visit the World Trade Center. The restaurant on top where I work, Windows on the World, is probably one of the most recognizable restaurants in the world. I just couldn't believe I was sitting here watching the buildings collapse. It was a nightmare.
How many people work in the World Trade Club?
We had about 40 people in Windows on the World in the club this morning. There was some kitchen crew in there. There were the accounting people, the banquet staff, some cleaning people, and they were prepping to open up for lunch at 12 o'clock in the greatest bar. We've been able to find some of the people through our network of telephones, but there are still a number of people that we have not, that we haven't been able to find yet. Even though, the communication systems after the first bombing had improved dramatically, with emergency lighting and back lights, etc. We just don't know if those people were able to get through the fire, which was below them as opposed to above them. So there are many, many people, many of our friends and colleagues that are not accounted for right now.
Mr. Rennell, I know this is a very difficult day for you, so I'll let you get about the business of trying to contact those people who work for you, and we thank you very much for being with us. Let's go to NBC's David Gregory. David, where's the president?
The president, Tom, has just arrived in Omaha, Nebraska at Offutt Air Force Base. There, he will convene a National Security Council meeting with the National Security team back in Washington via video conference, we are told. The president, you'll recall, left where I am, which is Sarasota, Florida, earlier today after making a statement about this attack at an education event, which was, of course, scrubbed. His intention at that point was to return to Washington promptly. Security concerns forced him to go to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, where he made another statement, and now to Nebraska. The White House is telling us he still intends and desires to go back to Washington as soon as he can, but again, security precautions are forcing the president to go to these various locations. Offutt Air Force Base, a secure location for him where he can go about the business of meeting with the National Security team. Vice President Cheney, as you have mentioned, running an operations center at or near the White House. We are not told for sure where he is.
Throughout the day. What you're watching on your screen now, debris and people, yes, humans, coming down from the upper stories of the World Trade Center before those World Trade Center towers collapsed. Some of the World Trade Center's 50,000 workers were seen leaping from windows to their certain death. That included, in one case, according to eyewitnesses, that included a man and a woman holding hands as they leaped from the World Trade Center as the flames engulfed their floors. Some people jumped from as high as the 80th floor. This happened as the planes exploded into fireballs. Unimaginable, these things, but part of today's reality. Now, first reports had at least 600 people undergoing treatment at hospitals. Early reports said 150 of those were in critical condition. At least another 1,500 so-called walking wounded were taken to Liberty State Park in New Jersey for treatment. The mayor of New York, Rudolph Giuliani, says it may take 2 days before a final figure of the dead and injured becomes known. No one would be surprised if it didn't take longer than 2 days. Yes, there was a New York mayoral primary vote scheduled today in New York that was canceled.
And somebody was photographing at the trade tower last night?
Yeah, she shot probably the last photo ever shot at the Trade Center.
Okay, let's have a look at what you have, and do you mind just taking us through it as we watch it on the air? How much video is there here, do you know?
This is footage.
Oh my goodness me.
That's all that's standing at the Twin Towers right now in the background. That's all that's standing. That's it. That's all that's left.
So you're literally right inside. What time did you actually photograph?
I don't even know. That was actually, I rode my motorcycle right up from there. That was about an hour ago, not even.
And this is right at the center of where the trade towers stood.
You can see, like, when you see the firemen, there's nothing they can do. It's just like amazing.
You must have been frightened at the very least to be there.
I mean, I was just thinking to myself what a powerful act of ignorance it was, really. It's amazing.
And this is the building adjacent to.
That's the Twin Tower. That was the Twin Tower. That was the other tower. And then we went up more into there.
You know, I just thought to myself I can smell it, but in fact what I can do is smell your shirt. Yeah. You brought the smell of disaster with you on your T-shirt. Were there other people in there? I don't see anybody sort of.
No, I was with one other person I ran into there, who actually somebody I know, and he was photographing as well. And it was just us two, and then the firemen. It's funny, I ran into my friend right there who's also taking pictures. He should be somewhere. They probably edited him out.
It's absolutely...
Look at that. That's all that's left.
Do you know whether that's the South Tower or the North Tower?
That's the South Tower.
And you saw no sign of life in here whatsoever?
No, I went all the way right there. Like, I don't know if they edited it out yet, but there's a big hole going down to the ground. There's nobody. And then we ran into somebody else because they haven't seen anybody. Nobody. But the firemen said, you know, that there's been a lot of people dead, like a lot of firemen died.
Because there were firemen in the building at the time trying to help people evacuate from the building. Yeah,
they said 200 people died. I thought the fireman I saw too said 200 people died already.
And this wall here, this is from part of the tower itself?
Yeah, that's the south tower, the lobby. And it's all the smoke and there's still fire going on in there right now.
Are you walking across?
Yeah, see,
you're walking across, and that's your friend also with a photograph. And the building on the right that occasionally appears is a building adjacent?
Yeah, and it's just gouged. Like the parts of the Twin Tower just gouged out the building. See, that's the concourse below. That's going down like 20 feet or so. But that's the part that's crazy. It's just that's all that's left.
Did you hear anything while you were in there?
Just like cracklings and pops and stuff. See, that's the guy who's been looking for his friends, and he didn't find anybody either.
And do we know who this person is?
No, he was speaking Russian.
Really? Looking through the devastation. And this now is what?
This is a party, actually. So.
Last night?
No, it's a while ago, but.
Where was the party in?
That was in PS1.
Oh. So you just simply decided to go in there to see what you could photograph?
Yeah, I wanted to, because it's funny because the name of my magazine is Prophecy, and we had just shot the Twin Towers last night. My photographer Amy had just been shooting it with the 4x5 format last night, and I hadn't spoken to her yet. And then my friend called me this morning and said, "Did you hear what happened?" And I said, "No." And then, so I went to, like I said, I went to the city.
I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with...
That's President George W. Bush, who was speaking at that time from Louisiana. Then he went on to Omaha, and he's now on his way back to Washington, D.C. His counselor, Karen Hughes, speaking from the FBI.
Minutes behind the first flight, when it too is hijacked. This, the actual plane, as it hits the south tower of the World Trade Center. 8:10 a.m. American Flight 77, a 757 with 64 aboard, has taken off from Washington's Dulles Airport, also bound for Los Angeles. It too taken over and loops back into the Pentagon. It slices in at an angle, leaving a deadly and ugly gash in the nation's military nerve center. And finally, 8 a.m. out of Newark Airport, United's Flight 93, a 757 with 45 aboard, bound Newark to San Francisco, hijacked as well, but crashes short of whatever its intended target is, comes down in rural western Pennsylvania. Eyewitnesses there.
And I heard a loud noise, and I happened to look up, and it was a plane. It was real low to me. It sounded like it was running fine to me. I just kept watching. I watched it go nosedive straight into the ground.
You could see where the plane had made the initial impact in the ground, and it was still on fire. It made a crater probably 30 feet by 30 feet, and it's probably 15 or 20 feet deep, and there's just debris scattered within probably a half-a-mile radius.
There are only two ways terrorists can sneak themselves or their weapons aboard planes, either through passenger screening or by going unscreened through locked doors into off-limits areas or onto the tarmac. Periodic FAA tests have found plenty of flaws. Found when government agents tried to sneak into secure areas, they were successful more than 2/3 of the time. Found testers also often able to sneak fake guns and explosives by X-ray screening. Once aboard, many speculate the hijackers must have disabled crews and taken over the plane's controls. More likely that than forcing a pilot with a gun at his head to fly right into the World Trade Center, for instance. Former American Airlines pilot Jim Tillman.
It is inconceivable to me that any airline pilot would allow anyone to force him to fly into an inhabited building. I cannot imagine how any pilot could be conscious or capable of doing anything to control that airplane at the time that it was directed at one of these buildings.
Terrorism specialist Neil Livingstone.
I suspect that what we're going to find is that the pilots were overwhelmed, perhaps dead already, and that trained pilots from the hijacker camp were in charge of those aircraft and were willing to die for their beliefs.
If there was time, the crews may have been able to press a button in the cockpit and send out a coded warning to controllers that there was a hijack in progress. Controllers may then have radioed back inquiries. But if the crews were disabled, the controllers would have been left in the dark for real information. Whatever else, controllers must have been surprised, in disbelief. There hadn't been a commercial plane hijacked in the U.S. for 10 years, since 1991. And now this.
And tonight we're getting reports of cell phone calls from at least 3 of those 4 flights, 1 from a flight attendant and 2 from passengers that were on board the flights. And they all talk about knives. There's, again, no mention of guns. In the first case, it was that flight that came out of Boston, and that was an American Airlines flight, and it was a flight attendant who apparently got a cell phone call off. I've heard variously it was to American Airlines operations or maybe somewhere else, but she reported that her fellow attendants had been stabbed in the back of the plane, and that the cabin had been taken over, and up front that the crew of the plane had been taken over, and that the plane was going down in New York, was the quote that we heard. Then, on the second flight that came out of Boston, that was the second flight of the day, that was 17 minutes behind that first flight, and also went into one of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, there was a businessman who got off 2 cell phone calls to his father. In the first call, he told his father that a flight attendant had been stabbed and the plane had been hijacked. Then the phone went dead. Then he got another call off to his father and said the plane was going down. So that, again, is a plane that went into the second Twin Tower of the World Trade Center. On the third flight of the day to be hijacked, the one that left from Dulles Airport, was supposed to go to San Francisco, instead was taken over, looped around, brought back to the Pentagon. It was Barbara Olson, the CNN commentator and Washington lawyer and the wife of Solicitor General Theodore Olson, who called her husband Theodore twice from the plane before it went down. I'm sorry, I think she called once, but she talked about knife-like instruments being used by the hijackers in the back of the plane, and said that passengers had been forced to the back of the plane. Anyhow, all this talk about knives might suggest that something managed to get through X-rays, and maybe it was thought by the terrorists that it would be easier to get knives through the X-ray machines and not be caught at it than to get guns through. At any rate, we may hear differently later, but so far there's been no mention of guns. Tom?
All right, thank you very much. NBC's Robert Hager tonight with a complete wrap-up of the aviation component of all this. No one could have anticipated that hijacked planes would be used, in effect, as guided missiles, although Tom Clancy, in one of his very popular books, did have a hijacked plane crashed into the U.S. Capitol. There have been other attempts in the past by other terrorists. You'll remember that there was an attempt to take some planes out of the Philippines and blow them up over the Pacific after the capture of the terrorists who were responsible for the original bombing of the World Trade Center. And there have been other planes as well. An Air India flight was blown up in midair, to say nothing of Pan Am 103, which was blown up over Lockerbie, Scotland, by terrorists widely believed that they were from Libya, and they have gone on trial, obviously, and that killed a great many Americans on that flight as well. So it's not the first time that this has happened, but it's never been used in quite this fashion before. And if you have been impatient with airline and airplane security in the past, wait until there's a resumption of flights. There's going to be a great change in this country. If you fly in the Middle East or through many parts of Europe, you're often several times questioned before you can get on the flight, as well as all the electronic security that you have to go through. You have to get to the airport well in advance of the scheduled departure time of the plane, and those will be some of the new procedures that are bound to be put into effect in this country. El Al, in fact, has undercover people on board, armed, trained sharpshooters who fly on all their international flights. It could come to that in America. One former State Department official was saying today we may even have to have some form of air cover in America, hard as that is to believe. But as you look at these scenes, you know the consequences of not having very tight security at our airports. Let's go to Pat Dawson now, who has been keeping track for us of the rescue efforts downtown and of the fires that continue to burn in lower Manhattan. Pat?
Tom, we are getting to the point of, I guess, what is best described as an unofficial shift change. We have seen for about the past half hour a number of New York City firefighters principally leaving here, leaving the scene, moving out along with their vehicles. In many cases, those vehicles in total disarray, seriously damaged. We were able to grab one of them to speak to us. This is firefighter Anthony Pasquarelli. Am I getting that right, from Engine 204?
Yes.
Can you tell us, first of all, when you got here?
Approximately 12 o'clock. And like you said, there's no words to describe what happened. There's numerous companies that are still in there. And, you know.
Now, have you heard the reports? We have heard a report from the New York City Firefighters Union that perhaps as many as half of the original firefighters who responded, perhaps as many as 10 or 11 companies, perhaps 200 men have been lost.
I mean, we operate inside the building, you know, so it's a possibility. Nobody wants to hope. I'm hoping everybody pulls through, you know. Hopefully God's with us, so.
Is that word making its way through amongst the rescue workers through the afternoon?
No, nobody's going to say anything until they have a definite answer. Like I said, everybody hopes that everyone pulls through. Nobody wants to come up with a number yet. We're still hopeful.
Tell me what is going on in there over the last 2 or 3 hours. Are you still fighting fires in there?
Yes, there's numerous high-rises that are still on fire that we're trying to battle, and we can't get close to it because of the rubble piled up as much as 100 feet. So it's just a tremendous effort with all the agencies of the city.
How many firefighters would you say and other rescue workers are in there working on these fires?
Like I said, it's hard to say. This is probably 3/4 of the city here. Mm-hmm. You know, they were pulling people off vacation, whoever wasn't working. So.
The fire's still burning in there. Have you heard of any buildings that may still be in danger?
No, none at this time.
The plane is 767 en route from Boston's Logan Airport to Los Angeles. The plane took off.
Something that has happened here at the World Trade Center.
And within half an hour became America's second Pearl Harbor.
Freedom itself was a
World Trade Center, 2/3 of the way up the 110-story building.
We had seen a fireball, and I can tell you it appears as though something has gone into the World Trade Center.
20 minutes later, at 9:08 a.m., a United Airlines flight, number 175, also from Boston to Los Angeles, tips its wings and crashes into the South Tower.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
An incredible fireball, so remarkable, it didn't even seem real.
Looked like a plane rammed into the second building.
35 minutes after that, 9:43 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77, scheduled to fly to Los Angeles from Dulles Airport outside Washington, dives into the Pentagon, destroying one of the building's 5 sides.
I happened to hear a plane come through. It sounded like it was running normal.
93 from Newark to San Francisco crashes in a remote area 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh.
It just come down like it was going to land, but instead of landing, it just went nose right into the ground.
In a little more than an hour, 4 horrific plane crashes, hundreds believed dead. But far worse was yet to come. At 10:05 a.m., the South Tower of the World Trade Center, possibly weakened beyond hope by the plane's impact, collapses. People can be seen jumping from the high floors.
The building came just rumbling down. It was like a war zone.
10:28 a.m., and the North Tower, choked with smoke and flames from its upper floors, disintegrates. Smoke and ash from the destruction combined to make parts of New York City look like ancient Pompeii after the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Rescue firemen were coated with thick white dust.
This is terrible. We lost tons of guys. We lost tons of guys.
Cars were under blankets of ash. Rescuers were just happy to be alive. As for the death toll, even tonight there were no hard numbers. But New York Mayor Rudolph Giuliani feared it might extend into the thousands. Half a world away,
there was a far different reaction. Gunmen appearing to applaud today's terrorism. But Palestine Liberation Organization leader Yasser Arafat did not join in.
We are completely shocked. Completely shocked.
War had been declared.
Ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families.
President Bush spoke to the nation, first briefly in Florida, and later from a military base in Louisiana.
The resolve of our great nation is being tested. But make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
Then, heading to another military base outside Omaha.
The airport's being evacuated. They need to go home.
All international flights into the U.S. were diverted to Canada. The FAA stopped every single commercial airplane flight for the first time ever. And terrorism experts made it a point to remind everyone that tomorrow had been set as a sentencing date for an associate of Osama bin Laden for his role in the 1988 bombing of the American embassy in Tanzania. That sentencing had been set for a federal courthouse near the World Trade Center. As the day ended in New York City, another skyscraper in the World Trade Center complex crumbled. Building number 7, 47 stories high. And tonight, while smoke from the collapse of the Twin Towers still lingered over New York City, most who saw and survived this day still had trouble believing what they saw. The phrase you heard over and over again was, "It seemed just like a movie."
Russ Mitchell. In Washington, the nerve center of the U.S. military sustained its own swift attack. David Martin, our national security correspondent, has details about what happened at the Pentagon and how the U.S. military might retaliate when retaliation is deemed appropriate. David?
Dan, 12 hours after the attack, fires are still burning, although Pentagon officials say the flames are under control and the Pentagon will be open for business tomorrow. We now have new close-up pictures of the damage done by that plane, and Defense Secretary Rumsfeld had a grim warning that casualties will be high.
Some people have been lifted out and taken away in ambulances, and the numbers will be calculated, and it will not be a few.
The first attack ever on the Pentagon occurred at 9:38 a.m. Eastern Time.
Flipped this pole over here, hit another pole and slammed right into the building. Huge explosion, and then utter pandemonium, as you might imagine. I mean, everybody was screaming, "Oh my God."
A hijacked American Airlines jet, which had just taken off from Dulles Airport, flew right up the main highway leading north into Washington and straight into the citadel of American military power.
There was no doubt about it. It was American Airlines slammed right into the building, and there was no doubt about it. Whoever was piloting that plane was aiming for the Pentagon.
Fearful that, like the World Trade Center, a second airliner was on its way, most of the building's 23,000 workers fled.
Plane's coming in. Come on. Let's go. Come on. We're not playing around here. Let's go.
F-16 fighters circled overhead looking for a second attack, but the damage had already been done. The plane had drilled a hole about a third of the way through the world's largest office building. The wounded were rushed to nearby hospitals as the fire spread and an entire section of the building collapsed, trapping many, many more inside.
Arlington search and rescue personnel are just now, and it's about almost 2 o'clock, just now gaining access to portions of the building where the plane hit because the fires were too intense.
One ray of hope. The Pentagon is undergoing a major renovation, and some of the offices in the path of the plane were vacant.
We're trying to find out who made it out okay and account for the people that may not have made it out.
When the plane hit, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld moved from his office on the other side of the building into the National Military Command Center in the basement. With smoke hanging in the air, he ordered aircraft carriers, amphibious ships, cruisers, and destroyers to New York and Washington, where they can serve as floating hospitals, help with the cleanup, and provide air defense against the possibility of more attacks. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs made a clear threat of military retaliation.
I have no intentions of discussing today what comes next, but make no mistake about it, your armed forces are ready.
Right now, suspicion focuses on Osama bin Laden, but first things first. The FBI is...
And the Independent says, Doomsday America, the Times of London,
when war came to America, and so it has gone. And I must tell you, Peter, the only thing I can tell you is, as you know, when we're overseas, American tourists tend to turn to folks like us, expecting that we know something. I'm afraid
It appears to have gone all the way through. We don't know whether it was just the fireball that did that. It was fully loaded with fuel for a transcontinental flight, and that plane, which also had its origins, as I remember now, in Boston, flew right into the south tower of the World Trade Center about 20 minutes after the first plane flew into the tower that you see just before you. And then, of course, which was unexpected to many of us in terms of how swiftly it happened, they came down. There are some haunting and poignant stories of people on cell phones calling to friends or loved ones in the World Trade Center when all of that was going on. One woman, a nurse that Robert Bazell talked to at St. Vincent's Hospital, was online with her husband, who was in the first building on the top floor when it was hit, and they had an exchange, and then the line went dead. There were other indications of people saying, "I love you," and the line going dead. And perhaps, for me at least, the most unsettling thought of the day of all was one man who described going down through the darkened and very wet stairwell because of the sprinklers that had gone off, and seeing people who were trapped in their wheelchairs, the large mobilized wheelchairs that couldn't fit into the stairwell, and certainly the elevators were not working. He got out, and shortly after that, that building came down. It was that kind of a day, and there are going to be so many more of those stories, an untold number at this hour, hundreds.
As people trapped in the building began falling from the windows.
It almost looked as if someone had just like stepped backwards and had fallen through a window.
What's this other jet doing? But the terrorists weren't done. 20 minutes later, another plane, another tower, another devastating attack.
Boom, just a loud explosion, and then you just look up at the sky because that's where it came from. The noise came from above. You look up and it's just like confetti in the sky.
And that was just the beginning. On the ground, chaos as one of the famed Twin Towers crumbles. Firefighters and rescue workers attack the other tower, still standing, still burning. Who knows how many trapped inside.
So stop going to your trucks, make sure you got flashlights. If you don't have any lights, then let me know.
No! Then that tower collapses too.
And we had some time to get some of the people out, but then there was those secondary explosions and then the subsequent collapses. So I don't know how many people were in there. I know there was a lot of firefighters, a lot of public safety personnel were in there.
You call her and you tell her, let her hear your voice. She's going to need to hear your voice. Just like you need to hear my voice, I'm okay. I'm okay. Thank you. Bye. See you later. I love you.
All day long, more fallout.
Because there might be a bomb in the school, maybe.
A reported bomb threat.
Un largo debate sobre la seguridad nacional y, por ende, el cuestionamiento y las críticas al actual sistema de inteligencia que no fue capaz de prevenir el peor ataque en la historia de los Estados Unidos en su propio territorio. Y de esto precisamente vamos a seguir hablando con Nabil Achkar. Él es el analista del Medio Oriente, conoce muy bien cómo se manejan estas células de terroristas. Y la pregunta que le quiero hacer ahora es: ¿en cuánto tiempo debe responder en los Estados Unidos de una manera concreta y qué tipo de respuesta debe dar?
Primero tienen que encontrar a los culpables. Seguramente que los servicios
marcó el final del más importante epicentro financiero del mundo, erguido hace 30 años en el corazón de la Gran Manzana. Las torres medían 415 metros de altura. Situadas en el sur de la isla de Manhattan, fueron construidas en 1973. Tenían estructura idéntica, con 126 pisos de altura y 1 millón de metros cuadrados en construcción. Cada torre contaba con elevadores con capacidad para unas 104 personas y 21.800 ventanas. Desde el observatorio se podía divisar a una distancia de hasta 45 millas. 50.000 empleados acudían a diario a trabajar a estas oficinas y miles acuden de visita cada día. Las torres eran un símbolo del comercio y la globalización mundial. Cuando se completó su construcción, eran los edificios más altos del mundo. Esta no es la primera vez que las torres son víctimas de un atentado suicida. El 26 de febrero de 1993, una bomba explotó en una de ellas. 6 personas murieron y más de 1.000 quedaron heridas. En esta ocasión, las torres fueron reabiertas en menos de un mes, pero hoy quedaron escombros y las llamas, que podían verse desde las avenidas centrales de Manhattan. Quedó el caos, el pánico, la devastación, el llanto y el desconsuelo, la incertidumbre y el temor de haber entrado a un campo de guerra. Mariela Salgado, Noticiero Telemundo.
Una vecina se da cuenta de que hay una catástrofe en la torre de al lado y la gente comienza a salir. ¿Cuánta gente usted que puede escapar en unos 20 minutos más o menos?
Pues el sistema de escaleras es múltiple, así es que probablemente creo yo que bastante gente pudo escaparse porque tuvieron, no sé exactamente el tiempo, una media hora, 45 minutos, ¿verdad?, para evacuar el edificio, y yo supongo que bastante gente tuvo oportunidad de salirse, especialmente la gente que vivía en los pisos, que trabajaba en los pisos más bajos. La gente que estaba en los pisos que estaban arriba del impacto de los
la caída de uno de los edificios.
Pero también todos los terminados se hacen polvo cuando caen. Adicionalmente, ¿verdad?, las columnas están también
mejor este edificio para una catástrofe de esta naturaleza y que se mantuviera en pie, ¿verdad? El destino de estas dos torres después del impacto.
It basically consists of 5 concentric rings, A through E. The outer ring is the E ring. The plane came in with such force under full throttle that it penetrated the E, D, and part of the C wings of the south side of the Pentagon building. So it was moving. But what a structure this is. It is so solidly built out of old school materials, brick, mortar, and stone, that it was hit on one side, and people who were on the other side of the building scarcely knew anything had happened. But however, one of the people who was in the building earlier today at 9:40 a.m. when this plane slammed into the Pentagon was none other than the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, and he said earlier tonight that he heard a shudder. Take a listen.
I felt the shock of the airplane hitting the building, went through the building and then out into the area, and they were bringing bodies out that had been injured, most of which were alive and moving, but seriously injured. And a lot of volunteers were doing a terrific job helping to bring them out of the buildings and get them into stretchers and into ambulances and into airlifts.
And while we must point out that many parts of the government basically had to shut down, the Capitol was evacuated. That's actually where
We're in the air about 45 minutes. Even before the towers are hit, this American Airlines 757, Flight 77, has left Washington's Dulles Airport bound for Los Angeles. It's believed the plane was in the air for over an hour before it destroyed a section of the Pentagon. This is all that's left of United Airlines Flight 93. It left Newark bound for San Francisco. It appears hijackers took control somewhere over Cleveland. The plane took a hard turn to the south. Then someone in the cockpit radioed that the plane wanted to change flight plans and head to Washington, D.C. It never made it, disappearing from radar, crashing south of Pittsburgh. As the hijackings unfolded, passengers on at least 2 of the jets made cell phone calls, warning of hijackers armed with knives. And a flight attendant on the American Airlines plane that hit one of the Twin Towers called the airline's operations center to report 2 flight attendants had been stabbed. Hijackers had broken into the flight deck. The flight attendant also identified the seat number of one of the hijackers. ABC's aviation analyst believes at the end the hijackers, not the pilots, were flying the planes.
There were pilots.
We had got... It was far from secure. Just minutes later, the second crash right into his office.
If I went back up, I would have been dead. And if I didn't leave...
Shots of the building burning. As I said, it was, it had the feeling that as terrible as the tragedy as it was, that it was beginning to get under control.
But control was about to be lost.
And then, the cop was like, run, run, to save my life, and took off on a...
As he looked through his lens. Then, a wall of swirling debris came racing right at him.
I was thinking about getting around the corner. I was thinking about getting out of the way of that cloud. And then,
the captain said...
One of the cell phone calls from that airplane, from a passenger, the passenger was talking about the circumstances of the hijacking, and at a certain point he said, wait a minute, there's a puff of smoke out on one of the wings, or a puff of white smoke, and then he said, we're going down. Exactly what sequence that's in, I don't know, but apparently that call was made to a 911 center, and I assume that we'll be able to get that later on. Now, if that's true, that's a very great puzzle, Peter, because there is nothing that you can do in the cockpit that's going to create a puff of smoke on the wing, and that raises the possibility of...
Their intercepts, they can look at manifests, they can piece together information that they might not have been able to put together before the picture had come together. So I have a high degree of confidence that the FBI, who are scrambling people internationally now, will catch many of the people responsible.
All right, Brian Levin, terrorism expert, director of the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State. Thank you very much for...
Of the World Trade Center. There were 92 people on board.
I was sort of at my desk working, general office activity, and felt an enormous, I almost felt like an earthquake, like I could literally feel and see things in the office moving and the floor moving. Immediately after it was some sort of explosion or something, there was an enormous volume of debris and paper. It almost looked like a dirty parade. All of this material just falling down.
It does not appear that there's any kind of an effort up there yet. Now remember, oh my God.
Oh my God. That looks like a second plane.
Minutes later, the second plane, the second tower. The fireball ate up the aircraft. It was a United Airlines jet from Boston, 65 people on board.
As soon as you got hit, I was thrown to a window. So I was very lucky to get out. There's a lot of people that didn't get out. There's a lot of people coming down the stairs, burnt up. It's bad.
Big explosion happened. Some guy came out. His skin was all off. I helped him out. This is him all over. There's people jumping out of windows. I've seen at least 14 people jumping out of windows. It's horrific. I can't believe this is happening.
New York City was staggered, and still it wasn't over. Here in Washington, the Pentagon was now burning. Yet another hijacked aircraft, American Airlines Flight 77 with 64 on board, had crashed through the Pentagon's walls.
U.S. officials are saying there was no warning, no indicators of any kind of a likely terrorist attack. Number two, they say Pentagon officials within the intelligence and the counterterrorism offices are now looking at this very intensely.
Across Washington, ABC reporters were hearing officials use the word terrorism.
It seems obvious unofficially to people here that it was a terrorist attack, but they obviously can't reach any firm conclusions at this point. So the Pentagon is engaged, and I'm sure law enforcement is, but they say they had no warnings.
And around the nation's capital, a city full of potential targets, everyone was on edge.
Okay, there's been an explosion of some kind that shook the grounds of the Capitol. We all heard it. Everybody ran for cover. We don't know where it was. We don't see the smoke yet. Everybody's saying, get back. We're running, we're running, we're running, we're running. They're screaming at us to get back.
This was the president this morning.
Today, we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
Mr. Bush was in Florida visiting a school. At the White House itself, everyone was evacuated. Then the whole federal government was evacuated, every federal worker. And in Washington, it was instant gridlock. In New York City, meanwhile, they were also evacuating. And suddenly, the towers began to collapse in on themselves.
Why are they pulling us out of here?
Because of maintenance. The tower's leaning.
The North Tower is
Broadway.
Right, come on, quick. Oh my God, there it goes!
I looked up as soon as we got across the street. I looked up, I saw the building the tower start to buckle. I just turned and ran, ducked down, put a jacket over my head. 3 or 4 of us huddled together, and it was just black everywhere.
And with everyone asking the obvious question, how in the world, answers will be coming in fragments.
The American Airlines Flight 11, the 767 from Boston to Los Angeles, a flight attendant called the American Airlines Operations Center to let them know that 2 flight attendants had been stabbed and the perpetrators had broken into the flight deck.
Then, just before lunchtime, in a green field in Pennsylvania, one final crash. A United Airlines 757 carrying 45 people from Newark to San Francisco. Reportedly, a passenger on board used his cell phone to call 911 before the plane went down. The president's safety had become an issue.
We flew for a couple of hours on Air Force One at what appeared to be a very high altitude. We were not told where we would land until the time came. There were jet fighters accompanying the president's aircraft. He has been traveling, we are told, by Ari Fleischer, and he will continue to travel.
Mr. Bush reached Washington earlier this evening. Already, we have these images that no one can ever forget. A tough guy mayor pained by what he saw.
The situation is that 2 airplanes have attacked apparently. Can't go to sleep. What? This is not go to sleep. All right, well then let's go north then.
The dust everywhere. The dust. And how it just wouldn't come off. And the desperate choice by desperate people to